Lovely people, I am here today to get ecstatic and chat about Rather Vengeful Accord by Danielle Knight, which recently came out. It released on the 18th of November. I read it just the day before is when I finished it, and I was also on the book tour hosted by the lovely people at Black Crow PR, who also kindly sent me an arc of this book, and it was so much fun. I just can't wait to ramble with you guys and try and convince you to read it because it's phenomenal. This is the author's debut book, and I would say it's adult fantasy, sci-fi, a bit of forbidden romance, enemies to lovers, question mark, and so much rivalry, academic rivalry. So we are in this world where our characters can either grave or spire. Graving is the art of crafting these dead bodies basically into these monstrous entities through necromancy, and they are then used in the war to kind of save on like people's lives, I guess. The gravers will go out after their effigies and go out and grave more bodies, whilst, you know, it's just like a zombie. They just keep coming back to life with this like magic, right? And then you've got the spirers, who for the entertainment and joy of society fight these monsters, and it's kind of like gladiators, so they fight them in these arenas for popular enjoyment and just to woo the crowd. And it's very kind of showy and fashionable, but also takes a lot of skill because you need to have acclaim, which is this blessing almost from the god that they believe in that grants them this superior kind of lightning power. And in this society, really, you're going to find the gravers in Preyburn, which is this kind of more desolate area. It's very hard done by, very kind of struggling to make a means. And spirers are usually found in Glimwick, which is this wealthy, well-to-do city, right, with all the people that are enjoying their generational wealth. And they also have this kind of longer lifespan because they're living well, and also because they're blessed by their god, with who's Aldrak, who has like bestowed his healing ability flesh towards his descendants, right? So that's kind of like the background of it. We're following Hal, who is desperate to get into St. Pendergast as a graver and meet her idol, basically Mortritus, who has done so much for the graving community and so much for the war, as well as research and finding all these things that can better their monsters that they create. And then we're also following Alistair, who desperately wants to get into St. Pendergast as a spirer because he has been cut off from his family for the last 5 years and sent to Preyburn, and that's how Hal and Alistair met at their school. They've been kind of pushed into this accord where, in order to reach their goals and attend St. Pendergast's esteemed university and each get what they're hoping to get. So with Hal meeting Mortritus and hopefully grave under her, and with Hal rekindle that relationship with his family and, you know, reaping the successes of aspiring career, they have to work together to do that and kind of come together as almost one student in order to get in and be successful. And they hate each other. They are rivals. They are constantly bickering, constantly one-upping each other. And of course there's a lot of resentment building, because with Hal, she doesn't want to spire. She doesn't want to do that. And also, if you spire, it takes away the magic of the necromancers. You won't be able to read the runes because they're kind of opposite gods. So Our Lady is fueled by spite and vengeance, and Aldrak is viewed with this kind of benevolent mercy, kindness, all of that sort of stuff. And so they're very opposing, right? So you can't practice one without losing the ability to do the other, shall we say. So yeah, with how she's very resentful because that's a risk, right? And also she's going into this accord having to spire, and she feels like she's getting further and further away from her dream. Alistair, on the other hand, is resentful because why is Hal being so selfish? Why is she not helping him be able to get back in the good graces of his family, and can't she see the bigger picture, right? Anyway, with all of the synopsis kind of said and done, let's get into everything that I thought. Hopefully I keep you with me, because it's going to be a rambly mess and I'm probably going to get very excited. Going into A Rather Vengeful Accord, we are thrown into a very world buildery start. At least for the first couple of chapters, you are kind of just setting up for the environment that you're in, the kind of hardships and conditions, as well as the contrasts between the city, like the capital, and the kind of more quiet town, which is where we kind of start with, as well as, you know, the wild monsters that are prowling the area, how that's coped with. And then finally, after you've kind of gotten used to all that information, is when I really truly began to kind of get into our characters' head. And to be honest, the majority, I would say, is pretty much through Hal's perspective, but you do get glimpses of Alistair as well, from his like mind's eye, you know. They just push through the info dumpy portions. I feel like it's an unavoidable thing to have, because you are set up in this fantastic new unique world, the first of a series. Hopefully it sounds like by the end that it's definitely at least going to have a second book, and you kind of want to know your place in it. You want to know how everything works. At least for me, I love all the details of an info dump of all the world. I can understand how some people may view that as being a bit dry or dull or dragged out, but really I feel like every detail that you got, especially in this instance, this example, was necessary to build the bigger picture of the story that we're in, right? So I really love that. I like to see the kind of conditions that our characters are faced with, what they were like however many years ago, how the world is, how the town is they live, the school that they're going to. I love to see all of that, and that was done really well here. The scenes as well were also extremely well depicted. I honestly had to just reread lines just for the sheer joy of seeing it play out in my mind. And I feel like I tend to be able to do that anyway, but I just couldn't help but notice how vivid those scenes were. With Danielle Knight's writing, I just felt like they were proper lodged in my frontal lobe, you know, like I was watching a movie. It was absolutely amazing. I loved the gritty and the grim dark atmosphere of this story, as well as the contrast that we could see from that in Preyburn and then the city central of like Glimwick, where everything was just a source of wealth and beauty and fortune and appeal for the spirers. It was just such a good contrast to see that, and then also see how deeper resentment was built from our characters, right? The concept of necromancers and gladiators was one that I couldn't imagine. I didn't like, until I read the book and I got the idea, I just couldn't fathom how that would be done and how it would work together. And honestly, it was so unique. It was such a really cool collaboration of these two like themes, I guess you would say, and it worked so well for the story. I was baffled, but I was intrigued, and honestly it was just such a unique concept. It was fascinating, and yeah, seeing that through the spiring and the graving that I mentioned earlier just fit. It was perfect. I absolutely adored Hal and how stubborn she was. She also had this sort of like selective hearing thing where she really just dwelled and focused on all the negative that Alistair was saying and anyone that was saying to her, honestly, and focused more on that. She was very doom and gloom in that way, and honestly, girl, I hear that. I feel that. She felt like such a solid and relatable character with a lot of faults to herself, but also just something that you could catch onto and be like, yeah, I see this, I relate to this. And honestly, having that kind of character, particularly in the first handful of chapters where you are kind of just getting immersed in the world and setting up and not really focusing much on what everyone's doing, but more building the foundations of the story up, that was really helpful to have. Alistair as a second kind of major character in this story was a complete different type of person than I think I've ever read about before. He never fully opened himself, yet it was interesting to learn that the customs of where he was brought up and where he's from, everybody is more approachable, forward, kind of like, for example, Alistair would flourish kisses on people in terms of respect, and he'd be very open in that way. Yet as a prey, Hal was very opposite, very reserved, very almost prudish in that way. Yet to see that this is how Alistair was, he was still a very reserved character. A lot of the times he was very checked in his emotions and his feelings and controlling himself, really. So it was about control, but also it was just funny to see that he actually was the more affectionate kind of person, right? It was just interesting to see. Yeah, he wasn't the most affectionate, because when you see them in Glimwick, he's like outshone by everybody, kind of being very touchy and like, oh, I praise you, yada yada yada. It was just such an interesting contrast, and you're going to hear that a lot, because that's a lot of this. It was very blatant. There was contrasts upon contrasts, and it was fantastic. The side characters, what can I say? I felt like everybody had a purpose to this story, whether it was building up the kind of origin arc of Hal and Alistair, or whether they, you know, more directly input themselves in the story to kind of drive it a little bit further. Limbrick, for example, she was the head teacher of, or one of the main teachers, I would say, of the school that Alistair and Hal were originally at. And you can tell that everybody, including her, had their own motivations and their own manipulation and tactics for getting what they wanted. Not everybody was doing things out of the goodness of their heart, and I feel like that is such a main theme and a main takeaway, by the end of this at least, that really drills into you. There was such a good dose of romance in here as well. I felt like it was just enough to keep me stringing along, like just when you think, oh my god, we're finally getting a little bit of something, the next second it would be snatched away and you'd be left devastated and confused and baffled and like, what is going on, you know? And then of course we had the ending, and I was just like, what? Absolutely dismayed and shocked. I felt like I was sucker punched. I had to go back and read passages that were probably more like key moments to see how I missed threads coming together. I just didn't want to believe it, basically. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to be where we were now. I felt betrayed, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I wholeheartedly recommend this book to you guys. If you see it out in the shops, actually not even if you see it, go and look for it, find it, order it, whatever. It is definitely pushed itself up there in my favourites. I feel like I'll be remembering this story for a long time. I can't wait for a sequel, especially with the cliffhanger plot twist ending that we got in this. I need it. I need it in my hands now. This was fantastic. Please read it. I loved it. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will catch you in another one soon. Bye.